Welcome to today's edition of the Author's Corner, brought to you by KNEO 91.7 FM The Word. I'm Roberta Foster, and today I welcome Cher Gatto to Author's Corner, and she has written the book Something I Am Not, which is published by Intangible Press, and she'll tell you more about how to find the book at the end of the program. Let me tell you just a little bit about Cher. She is an award-winning author of adult and young adult fiction. She and her husband and their 5 children developed a ranch in Mexico for at-risk youth and families and a recovery ministry in New Jersey. She holds a master's degree in psychology, but credits 10 years in the desert, raising 5 children and following the heart of God with any wisdom she may impart through her life and her novels. And so, Cher, thank you so much for being with us on Author's Corner.
Roberta, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here today.
And so I've given a little background for your life, but tell us what it was that compelled you to write this novel, and what do you hope happens when the individuals learn more about this whole human trafficking issue?
Yeah, thank you, Roberta. So my husband and I and our 5 kids, as you had mentioned, we were called to the mission field in Mexico. And we developed an off-grid ranch in the middle of the desert. So we had no running water, no electricity, literally in the middle of the desert. So it was a very trying and very rewarding time. And while we were there, we used horses to share God's love with kids that were in really difficult areas. We had a village right down the street from us that was one of the most poverty-stricken villages in La Paz, Mexico. That's where we were, down in the Baja Peninsula. And so it was amazing, though, the impact. It was definitely a God calling, and he did amazing things down there. The ranch is still going strong. We handed it over to our coworkers about 10 years ago, and they've taken it that next level. So it's really doing amazing work. When we first got down there, I'm probably not like most authors in that it was definitely a hidden gift that the Lord had placed in me. And I didn't even know it was there until we were down in Mexico. And one day I was shoveling a horse corral, and this scene came into my head. And it was very clear and very powerful, and I could see it like a movie screen. And I said, "Oh, I should go write that down." And I went in the back room of the ranch, sat down, and started writing. And this story just poured out of me. And it wasn't until much later when I asked the Lord why I even wrote this story that he made it clear to me why I did. And so that was an amazing experience, because, again, I didn't even know that I had this desire and this passion to write. If you have any hidden gifts, I love the fact that we are God's poem, his handiwork. I never even intended Billy's story to be about human trafficking. What had happened was, when we were down there working, our coworkers had a battered women's home. They had this shelter that was really hidden away. The security level, no one knew where it was. If they picked somebody up, they drove all around the city and back again before they landed at the shelter, because they had some high-profile cases. They had just a lot of stuff happening. And so at the beginning of our ministry, when we had gotten our first couple horses, we started working with the girls that came out of the shelter. And a lot of the girls were not even 16 years old, some of them 14, 15, and many of them had babies of their own. So they were babies raising babies, and their stories, when I started to hear them, were gut-wrenching. And it was really, for me, probably the first time that I was exposed to that level of depravity. And I was really shaken at my core. And about a year after we got on the field and a year after working with these young girls, there was a huge security breach in the shelter. Someone bombed it, and they knew where it was, and our coworkers had to basically shut the shelter down. And there was nothing they could do. All the girls just kind of went back to wherever it was they came from. And so some of those places it was so tragic. And it was so tragic for me, and I felt so hopeless and helpless to help the girls. There was nothing I could do. And about a month or two after the shelter closed, one of the girls showed up at church with the man who was supposedly her father. I don't know if he was or not, but she showed up, and I looked in her eyes. I said hello to her, and I looked in her eyes, and just like the emptiness that I saw there really rocked my soul, really rocked my soul. And I think that when I started writing, I didn't know that Billy's story was going to have any of those elements in there. But when it just poured out that way, and I looked back on it, I thought, oh my word, like the Lord has taken me through this process of healing, really, for myself, for Billy, for having like a different ending. I needed a different ending. I needed a redemption story. And I don't know if what the ending was for any of the girls that I worked with down there, but I pray for them, and I prayed that their story had a redemption ending to it.
Well, today I am talking with Cher Gatto about her book, Something I Am Not, which is published by Intangible Press, and you're listening to Author's Corner. I'm Roberta Foster. So a couple of questions that came to mind as I was reading your book. One of the things is you talked about was seeing this girl with a man that was purported to be her father. Now, in the story, you have Billy and a man who beats him regularly. And yet, throughout the story, this young man named Billy continues to do things that actually protects this man called his father. And the thing that hit me about that was, here there's such abuse, and yet Billy didn't want to do anything that hurt this man that was beating him. Can you talk about the psychological dependency there, and I think that's something that goes along with the whole human trafficking thing, that somehow the abused feels compelled to stay with the abuser.
Exactly. That's just such a rough cycle of trauma. Somehow we gain our value system, and somehow we feel loved as distorted and as upside down as that love is. And it's very difficult to break that cycle, to break those chains of that. And one of the things that Billy's story really brought home to me and taught me was that I think when you grow up in sort of a sheltered environment, you think of human trafficking as being something that's so far away, that's out of reach, that is in another country, or it happens not right in your back door, right in your neighborhood. And in fact, it does. And that's why I think Billy's story is so true to the fact, because he's raised in Pennsylvania. He's not in Cambodia or in Mexico or somewhere where you just kind of assume this is taking place. He's right in our backyard. After I wrote the story, one of the most impacting things for me was that a young girl who read it became extremely angry about the story. She said, "How did you know this? Because you're not supposed to know this." So she confided in me that her story was almost exactly Billy's story. Almost exact. She said, "That is my story on so many levels, and you're not supposed to know about it, and you're not supposed to talk about it." it wasn't until she actually read Billy's story and it gave her a voice to what had been happening in her own life that she began to share it.
Wow.
It was the first time in like 20 years that she opened up and began to share her story. So that was amazing to me, that Billy's story gave her a voice to begin to share that, because the silence, the shame, all of that is so embedded in someone's heart. It's very hard to break through that.
In the comments that you've just made earlier, you talked about in church. So in just a couple of minutes that we have left, what should churches be looking for, and what can churches do to help with this whole human trafficking issue? Can you give us some insight on what we can be looking for?
It's that person that's sitting in that pew who, for some reason or another, doesn't look like you necessarily. Someone who maybe is head down, maybe is separated, maybe is not engaging, maybe is outside of just the culture of church. But for some reason, the love of the Lord has like drawn them there, and they're sitting in there in that back row. And it's probably someone who you might think, well, you know, that person I'm not going to connect with. I'm just going to keep going, right? That's the person that I encourage you to connect with, because that's the person that's hurting the most, and that's the person who needs the love of Jesus. Well, I mean, like we all do, right? But that's the person who is seeking to know the Lord. And so I would encourage all of us to kind of break out of our shell, our own comfortable routine of being in church and just getting what we can from the time there, and just look for that person who might be sitting right next to you and just reach out to them. Yeah. My husband and I do a recovery ministry, and so the trauma is real. The trauma of abuse is not always wrapped up in like a human trafficking situation, but there's trauma of abuse that's happening in our homes and in our families and right next door. And so those folks, those individuals are in our church, and they're so hungry for the light of Christ in their lives. And so I would just encourage any of our listeners to look for that person and to stop and reach out. That would be my encouragement to them. Or to all of us. There's a lot of great organizations out there, like IJM, International Justice Mission, who specifically work with human trafficking. If you want to find out more about what they do, I would encourage you to look them up.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well, this book had come out some time ago, something I am not, but I understand you are working on something else, or maybe it has just recently been released.
Yes. Today, actually.
Okay.
Its release date. Yeah, so I'm super excited about that. A lot of my readers had asked, what happens next in his life? We want to know what happens next. And there were a lot of unresolved things that Billy needed to tie up, his own healing, his own search for what had happened to him as a child. And so the new story, Something Else, takes him through that. And really, he goes through a deep understanding and a deep freedom from the darkness that he feels is inside of him.
Great.
Right? So like that whole guilt is knowing we did something wrong and feeling bad about it. Shame is knowing we did something wrong and feeling like we are bad, we are wrong. There's something inside of us that's broken, that's missing pieces that cannot be fixed, right? And so Billy, from his trauma from the first story, has a lot of things that are tied up inside of him over who he is and that shame that's inside of him. And so I really wanted him to explore that more and go through that healing process. And so Something Else is out today. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And so actually Something I Am Not was released on January 15th. back in 2019, and so the sequel is releasing today on January 15th. Yeah.
All righty. Well, as a reminder, I'm talking with Cher Gatto about her book, Something I Am Not, and the best way to find this book and your new book. How do we do that, Cher?
Yeah, it's up on Amazon. You can go there and look that up. I also have a website where you can get some more information. It's www.chergatto.com. And I would just love to have more conversations with anybody who wants to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to talk more about the story, connect with you in any way. So definitely join my newsletter. I do have a blog that I write, and I write about a lot of those traumatic things and things in my own life that have happened that we've journeyed through as a family and me as an individual. And so I encourage you to check those out.
Okay. So one more time, the book today, Something I Am Not, and we sure appreciate Cher sending us a copy of that book. And to our listeners, if you'd like to hear this interview again or share it with another, you can find it on your favorite podcast platform or through kneo.org. Thank you so much for tuning in, and Cher, thank you for being with us on Author's Corner.
Thank you, Roberta.
And this is Roberta Foster on Author's Corner. Join me again next time.
Hi, this is Luke Taylor with the Sky High Podcast Network. If you've been blessed by the program that you're listening to, I'd like to personally ask you to consider supporting our station. Our network is a collection of programs produced by KNEO Radio in Neosho, Missouri, a nonprofit station dedicated to educating Christians, reaching the lost, and making an eternal impact. This program is just one of many designed to encourage, equip, and inspire you in your walk with Christ. To help keep these programs going strong, visit kneo.org and click the donate button. And if you'd like to let us know in the memo line that you're a listener of this program, we would truly appreciate it. Thank you for being part of what we're doing here at the Sky High Podcast Network. If today's program spoke to you, please prayerfully consider supporting our mission. Together, we can make a difference for eternity.